cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And for our third segment of the day here on the show, we transition a little bit from the world of the NFL to the world of college football. Going to do the same thing we just did, but this time for some college football stars. And the 4 players in this list, some of them may have already been eliminated from CFP consideration. In fact, one of them pretty much could be. But all 4 of them could be of huge importance to their teams in these final 2 games, whether or not they make the playoff or not. Whether or not they're in their conference championship games lobbying for that first round bye. But when all is said and done, I think this list is the most comprehensive in terms of how important some players will become. Because I'm sitting here thinking that at least 3 of the 4 teams that these players are on could get into the playoff, or in prime position to, anyways. But going forward, these last 2 weeks of the regular season in college football, look for a lot of these players to carry the load. And so, without further ado, let's jump right into this list. Starting off with a running back who, and I'm not putting this lightly, could be the most important player in the entire college football playoff when it happens. Putting in a performance that proves that his transfer was not a fluke and it was one done with great intentions for this team. Let's talk a little bit about Quinshon Judkins here. And the reason why I'm saying that Judkins could be someone who in the CFP is going to hold a lot of weight in that tournament-style format is because Ohio State brought him in as a complementary piece to another very workmanlike running back in Travion Henderson. But this season, we haven't really seen a performance from either of these backs that lends itself to the notion that if they need to be called upon in games of importance, that they would step up. And this game was not of much importance to Ohio State. It was a humdrum game against Northwestern. They were expected to win anyways. But Quinshon Judkins, having 15 carries for 76 yards and 2 touchdowns, goes to show that if one or both of these running backs can either be a physical smash-mouth style guy against better teams or add some explosiveness to this already explosive Ohio State offense with a lot of big play weapons, this is a dangerous team that could go all the way. So Quinshon Judkins needs to continue proving these next couple of weeks that he's ready to carry the load for Ohio State because they're going to face a lot of challenges, a lot of talented defenses. Texas could lie in wait. Bama, who steadily improved on the defensive side of the football, could lie in wait. Oregon again could lie in wait in the playoff and the Big Ten championship game. Penn State in a rematch could really trouble them on the defensive side of the football. But this performance proves that even though it's not necessarily special in terms of lofty numbers, from a fantasy perspective, it may not have garnered you much points. But it's still something to look at from the whole perspective of Ohio State's season. If they really, truly want to win the CFP, this performance could give them hope. Now, the second player I want to talk about on this lineup is a receiver, I believe, that I feel like, even though might not even make the college football playoff, just is someone who perhaps a lot of people following this team thought would have a better collegiate career and be a better support to Cade Klubnik. But this game really proves that all those notions could be put to rest. Antonio Williams, his junior year, one of the leading receivers in this team, one of the leaders period of this team, 13 receptions, 149 yards, 2 touchdowns in this one against Pitt. And not for nothing, it wasn't necessarily a big game for either of these teams because they feel like they're going to need a lot of help to get into the conference championship game anyways, and whether or not they lost or not, they would still have a mountain to climb in terms of hoping and praying that Miami and SMU slip up. But it was a very tense game that required a hero to step up, and Antonio Williams did just that. And so, even if Clemson's out of the playoffs, they have faith in knowing that Antonio Williams, after all the concerns about who would step up for this team, had a performance indicative of someone who's a leader of this team. And especially considering the fact that Clemson is so staid and steadfast in their belief in not going into the transfer portal to get players. That stands for something, because leadership in teams of that nature is paramount to their success. So Antonio Williams, I have to acknowledge him, even if he's not going to be as important as some of the other players on this list come playoff time. I still wanted to pinpoint this performance because it's a performance from a receiver who I feel like has gone under the radar a lot in his career and finally deserves a lot of respect, even though it might be a little bit too late. And the third player that I want to get into is also potentially being a very important player in the college football playoff picture, because like I said, there could be rematches for this team with huge implications for them. And if, they get into a situation where this offense, much like they were last year, gets a little bit stagnant, this is going to be the guy to rescue them. And he's a really good option to have because he's kind of like the mini Taysom Hill in a lot of regards. He has a more defined position, yeah, but he is someone much like Taysom Hill who might actually be much more important to his team's success this season than Taysom Hill, funnily enough. And that is Tyler Warren of the Penn State Nittany Lions. I cannot really describe this guy right here. 8 receptions, 127 yards, 3 carries for 63 yards, and 2 total touchdowns. 35 fantasy points. I did forget to mention some fantasy points for players. Let me go back and do that. Quinshon Judkins had 20.9 fantasy points. Antonio Williams, 33.4. Sorry for not addressing that sooner, but just wanted to let you know their fantasy production. But speaking of fantasy productions, this guy is the most impressive. Because look at Penn State. There are still moments where I fear that against far better teams, their offense grows stagnant and they can't put up points. And it happened against Ohio State already, where they got into the red zone and they failed to convert in short yardage situations. And that's the reason they lost that football game. But Tyler Warren's a special kind of player who, should Penn State get a home game in the first round of the CFP, could be a huge factor. I don't think many people want to go into Beaver Stadium to play Penn State either. And Tyler Warren kind of adds that atmosphere because he's a player who you never know where he's going to line up. And so I feel like, Quinshon Judkins from a Big Ten/CFP standpoint, yes, is a more important factor because of what he means for that team, what they brought him in there to do. But Tyler Warren is just an exciting weapon to monitor and analyze. As a fantasy player, as a casual college football fan, as someone who might be looking into a dynasty league in the future and wants someone who's just like a Taysom Hill you can rely on any given Sunday should you get to the NFL. But when I think about how the Nittany Lions can utilize him going forward, I feel like his importance might wane compared to Judkins because of the pressures put on him. Not saying that he can't live up to them, but it's certainly a heavy load, a heavy burden to kind of be the guy to unlock different defenses. And yes, they had a chance against Ohio State, but chances are Ohio State's not going to be the best defense they face, A, in the Big Ten championship game should they get there, or B, in the playoffs. So look for Tyler Warren to kind of still be just as effective, if not one of the most effective players in these next couple of weeks in the country, but still someone who I have to see carry over into the playoff, because it's going to have a lot of wear and tear on this Penn State team to grind it out with a guy like Warren. But he is one of the most capable players of doing that in the country, because of how physical he can be. And that's a special player right there that I have to acknowledge week in, week out. But finally, last but not least, let's get into the most consequential player, at least in the Big Ten, maybe in the entire country, but more so from a draft perspective, perhaps, because this guy's unanimously right now probably going to be the number one QB off the board in the 2025 NFL Draft. But for the time being, in these next couple of weeks, for the Colorado Buffaloes, he's going to be someone to watch. And he might be one of the most fun players to watch over these next couple of weeks as well, especially from a fantasy perspective. And that is Shedeur Sanders, of course. 30 for 41, 340 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Again, in a potential trap game against the Utah Utes. 21.7 points for him. And so it just goes to show that momentum is everything. And Colorado found it, and because of it, Shedeur can thrive in an environment where, yes, it's a lot more pressure than you think for the Buffaloes, because perhaps a lot of pundits did not expect them to be in this situation. But I do think that getting this win in a game that they definitely could have lost because of what Utah represents as a quote-unquote spoiler team for the past couple of years, and doing it in such dominant fashion goes to show that this team has staying power. And if they make the CFP win the Big 12 championship game, they're a really sneaky team in that tournament there. So look for Sanders' kind of legacy to continue to grow. Yeah, he might not get as many headlines as, say, a guy like Travis Hunter over there, who's definitely going to be up for Heisman, but he still is going to be a fun, integral part of the CFP should Colorado get there. And they have all momentum. And like I said, momentum can take you far in college football. Let me know what you think in the comments, because coming up next, we transition back to the NFL, particularly to my positional rankings from a fantasy perspective, starting off with my QBs. Who do I think will shine in Week 12? We'll have to find out right after this short break.